أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. For the hastening and the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. Apologies for the delay. I was running a bit late. And tonight, we'll continue with our hadith session. We'll continue with the topic that we had started last week. And of course, I also want to offer my condolences because according to some narrations, one of the dates that has been proposed as the day of the passing of Lady Banin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayha, is these days that we are going through. And so we want to take a moment to remember this dear mother who is really an example for all of us. What type of woman, this is a question that we should all, think about and contemplate. What type of woman is willing to give away 4 of her children in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Giving away 1 of your children is such a difficult thing to do. And then you look at those like Banin who give away 4 of their children. And according to some narrations, even when this caravan was returning from the plains of Karbala, they were coming back towards the city of Medina, Zainab salamullahi alayha, and the other captives were returning. They say that the first she asked about was Imam al-Hussein. That was the first person that she asked about, according to some of the narrations. You can imagine the status and the iman and the faith that a woman like this has, who cares more about the children of Fatima al-Zahra than she does about her own children, who's willing to give away 4 of her own children for this path and for this cause. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the things that we do in this world, the things that we do in this life, that inshallah we can make someone like her proud on the day of judgment. Continuing with the topic that we had started last week, the topic was the topic of foresight, or what the ahadith called al-hazma. Foresight meaning the idea that if I am doing something, I don't just blindly do it. I am eyeing what's going to happen at the end of it. I'm keeping in mind what the final result and what the final goal is going to be. And depending on what the final result is going to be, I'm going to decide whether I'm going to carry on with this activity or not. This is the basic general idea behind the concept of foresight. And the hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen said, Al-hazmu kiyasatun. Foresight is a way of being clever. It's a way of showing how smart you are. That you don't just blindly do things. No, you think about the outcomes before you actually start, before you actually get involved in a activity. And last week we talked about this in quite a bit of detail, about what hadith tells us that the human being, a believer, he is to always be keeping his eye on the result and on the fate and on the final situation, the final destination. And this is what brings wisdom to him. We said that if we wanted to apply this to our own lives, this can be applied in a number of different ways, particularly when it comes to those bigger decisions that we make in life. The person that I choose, for example, to live my life with, am I making this decision just based on emotions, just based on, looks, for example, or am I making this decision based on me actually picturing what our life is going to be together? Yes? My career, anything that a mu'min, a believer gets involved in, he has to have foresight. He has to think about what's going to happen in the future. He may not always get it right. Sometimes he might be wrong about it. He makes mistakes. But he did do his duty. He did do what was on him to think about the future and contemplate it and see if the future is what he wants and then he engages in an activity. Yes? We said if you do this, then if the result turns out to be something different from what you wanted, then you can place this on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I make an investment, and this investment that I'm making is not just based on some trend, it's not just based on, some hype, it's not based on, no, it's based on my research, it's based on the information that I have received, it's based on thought and contemplation, right? This is what experts are telling me, are sharing with me, that it's the safe way to go, for example, and then I do that investment, and for whatever reason the investment doesn't work out, then I can put it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then I can say, Ya Allah, this was something that based on my mind and my thought, I was supposed to take a step in this regard. And I took it, and didn't turn out to be the way I wanted it to be. But I acted based on my knowledge and my research. And I took the steps that I was supposed to take. I didn't rush the decision. I didn't make the decisions blindly. I didn't make the decisions based on emotions. If you do that, if you do your part, then when something doesn't work out, you can say this was on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say inshallah khair, then you can say this. Then you can say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a bigger plan in mind for me. But if I don't take those steps, if I don't have that foresight, if I don't do my research, if I don't, as they say, if I don't do my homework, as they say, and then I make a decision, and then things go south, I can't sit there and say, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had his own plans for me. No, he didn't have any plans for you. You just didn't do your homework. You just didn't think hard enough about this. You just didn't consult other people about this. Yes? You were just living life blindly. You made a decision, and well, here's the result. I give this example before as well. If someone closes their eyes and they just walk through a street, and a car hits them, can they sit back when people come to visit them in the hospital, and can they say, oh, what happened, brother? He says, oh, inshallah khair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had bigger plans for me. You can't say that. Why? Because you were the one who closed your eyes. Yes, now if you were walking on the sidewalk and you were doing everything properly, yes, you were taking the precautions, and then this happens to you, then yes, you can put it on him. No problem there. You can say, you know what, I was doing everything in the proper manner, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted this to happen for me. Then yes, I can do that. But if I don't take those steps, if I don't do my part, then I can't come back and say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He had bigger plans for me. No, He didn't have any bigger plans for you. You just didn't do things right. You didn't think about it. You didn't make the right decision. When I say you didn't make the right decision, meaning that you didn't even take the proper steps. You didn't take the precautions. You didn't consult those that you have to consult. And now, yes, you're in the situation that you're in. So if I take the steps properly and then the outcome doesn't turn out to be the way I want it to be, then I can put it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if I don't do that, then I can't sit there and say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had bigger plans for me. Or sometimes we say, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to send me a message. Maybe He's trying to tell me something, that this terrible event took place in my life. Yes, maybe He's trying to send you a message. If you did everything properly and the outcome still didn't turn out to be the way you wanted it to be. But if you're the one who disregarded your duty, if you're the one who didn't take the proper steps, then can you sit there and say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell me something. He's not trying to tell you anything. You just didn't make the right decision. You just didn't take the right steps. So all of this is saying that this foresight, it helps me at the end of the day sit back and say, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted for me. If I take the steps that will give me foresight, if I think, if I consult, if I take my time, if I don't rush the decision, then when I do take that decision, I can do tawakkul, which means that if the outcome doesn't turn out to be what I wanted, then I can place it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a good example of this is COVID. If I take my precautions, yes, I take my precautions, and God forbid, I contract the virus, yes, then I can put it on Him. I said, this is what He wanted for me, because I took the precautions that I was supposed to take. Yes, but if I don't take the precautions, if I don't do the things that I know I'm supposed to do, and then, for example, I get sick, can I sit there and say, oh yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had bigger plans for me. No, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You can turn this, of course, into a learning moment, but you can't put this on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can only put things on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we have done our parts. Okay, and this foresight, thinking about what's going to happen in the future, is part of this. Now, this is what we were discussing as it relates to our day-to-day life, our career, our marriage, the decisions that we make in our day-to-day life, which is all very important. If you are a youth of 20 years of age, of 15 years of age, it should be part of your life of just thinking about what your future is going to be like. We live in a society, unfortunately, that doesn't teach us these things. We live in a society that they tell you if you're 20 years old, oh, no problem. You have so much life left for you. You don't have to think about the future. Have fun right now. No, that's not what Islam says. Islam says you can enjoy yourself, but you need to be thinking right now about your future. When you look at someone like Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ibrahim, a prophet, he was asking what his legacy is going to be in his youth years. He was thinking about what his life is going to mean in his youth years. He wasn't asking this question at the end of his life. No. When he was younger, he said, وَجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخَرِينَ. Ya Allah, make it such that after I am gone, others will remember me in a good manner. I will leave behind a legacy that everyone will remember me by. And when you look at the verses, you find that he is saying this in his youth years. When he's young, yes, when you're young, that's when you're supposed to give thought to your life, to your career, to your marriage. Yes, everyone can give thought to things once they're at the end of life. That's not difficult. What's difficult is when you're young, asking these tough questions of yourself when you're younger. Now, this is when it comes to your day-to-day life. When you take it a step further, Quran and Hadith want to give us a deeper window into what this foresight is actually going to look like. If you go a little bit deeper, then you find Quran and Hadith say the one who has foresight is not just the one who asks what's going to happen 5 years from now, what's going to happen 10 years from now, what's going to happen 15 years from now. That's one example of it. But the true foresight is the one who looks beyond this world. For those whose worldview only extends as far as this world, then foresight means looking what's going to happen at the end of this world. Sometimes you'll hear speakers, different individuals that say, okay, you know what? You have to do this. Otherwise, when you're leaving this world or, on your deathbed, you're going to regret this. Why? Because their worldview only goes until when? Only goes until the deathbed. What happens after the deathbed? Many of them don't know. Yes? So they say, okay, we have to plan so that the end of your life, which is the deathbed, which is 70, 80, 90, 120 years, inshallah, so that you don't regret things at that point. Islam is going to take it a step further, and this is, of course, a big step. You don't plan for 100 years. You're planning for eternity. Now, this is going to change things fundamentally. Islam says, listen, if your worldview of what life is, if you define life as this 50, 70, 90 years, then yes, your foresight is going to be planning for these 90 years. If you define life as something that is never going to end for you, it's eternity that's ahead of you, then you should be asking yourself a question about eternity, not about the next 5 years, not about the next 10 years. This is what Quran and Hadith tells us, yes? This is why the Hadith says of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Al-Hazimu man lam yashghalhu ghururu dunyahu anil amali li ukhrah. He says the one who has foresight is not the one, in my wording, who thinks about 2 years from now or 5 years from now. The one who has true foresight is the one who doesn't let the world of that he finds around him, the work that he finds around him, disturb him and keep him busy from preparing for his akhirah. If he can keep an eye on his akhirah, this is the true foresight. And that doesn't mean you don't plan for this world. No, it means you plan more for this world, in fact. It means you're more strategic in what you do in this world. Yes? Doesn't mean you forget about this world. It's actually the opposite of it. Yes? The Imam is saying if your worldview is that you were created, you're going to live 50, 60, 70, 100 years in this world, and then you're going to move on to eternity, well, then your foresight shouldn't end at 100 years. It should end at eternity. That's the question that you should be asking yourself. Okay. This is why the Quran says about the disbelievers. It says these guys, these disbelievers, because they don't believe in this eternity, their worldview is very limited. يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. They only know a very limited amount of this world, of this life. What does that mean? That means their knowledge of their life extends so little, and their foresight will also be so little as well. So this person will only worry about how much money he's making. He'll only worry about whether other people like him or not. He'll only worry about, does he marry the most beautiful person? He's only worrying about these types of things. What type of foods he's eating? Yes? He only cares about these things. But he doesn't have an eye on the next world. Why? Because his knowledge is so limited. يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. And they have forgotten about the akhirah. And this is exactly the problem. This issue of foresight is the defining factor of deciding whether a person makes it into heaven or doesn't. You might say, how so? I thought that depends on whether you do good deeds or not. I thought that depends on whether you do wrong deeds or good deeds or how you live your life. Yes, but how you live your life depends on this. The one who forgets about akhirah, automatically he does not work for the akhirah anymore. The one who doesn't have foresight, he doesn't look at what's going to happen in his akhirah. He forgets about it. This person is not going to sacrifice for the akhirah. He's not going to put himself through difficulty. As the verses of the Quran say, he's not going to qaddamtum. He's not going to send forward anything for him. He's not going to do that because he's not even thinking about that. The people who end up in hellfire, the verses of the Quran tell us, and I'll go through that in just a second. The people who end up in hellfire are the ones who lose foresight. They lose sight of where they're headed. Because the verses of the Quran literally tell us that the people who show up on the Day of Judgment and their fate is hellfire are those that the Quran says they forgot about a day like this. They didn't keep in mind that this was their fate. They didn't keep in mind that this is where they're headed. And the Quran also tells us that the ones who end up in heaven, the ones who end up with their book of deeds in their right hand, are those who remembered that day is coming. It's all about foresight. It's all about this person living his life but keeping his sight on the final destination. Where am I headed? If I do things in this way, what is my akhirah going to look like? Am I prepared for my... Just depending on whether he asks himself these questions or not, this is the defining factor between a person who ends up in hellfire and the person who ends up in heaven. The one who ends up in hellfire, he doesn't care about this stuff. Yes? He forgets about this stuff, as the Quran says. It says, Inna nasinakum. They forget about the day of judgment, and because of this, we forget about them too. When they come to us asking for mercy on that day, we don't give them mercy. Why? Because you forgot about us as well. So depending on whether I keep the akhirah in mind or not, foresight is the defining factor. It is the differentiating factor between me ending up where I want to end up, or God forbid, having to be punished. This is what the verses of the Quran say. When the person who is going to enter into heaven, he receives his book of deeds in his right hand. What does he say? This is from our tafsir that we were discussing just a couple weeks ago. What are the things that he says? If you remember Surah Al-Haqqa, there are two things that he says. Number one, he's so excited, he will invite others to come and read his book of deeds. Ha umuqra'u kitabiya. Come and take a look at my book of deeds. And then immediately afterwards he says, Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiya. I knew that I would end up on a day like this. I knew this day was coming. He had foresight. He was thinking about this day. Okay, this is the one who ends up in heaven. What about the one, on the other hand, who ends up in hellfire? Surah An-Naba tells us. It says, لَابِثِينَ فِيهَا أَحْقَابًا. We put these people in hellfire for years and years. لَا يَذُوقُونَ فِيهَا بَرْدًا وَلَا شَرَابًا. When they are in the hellfire, there is no coolness, there's no cool, وَلَا شَرَابًا, and there's nothing that they can drink of, إِلَّا حَمِيمًا وَغَسَّاغًا, except boiling water. Okay. جَزَاءً وِفَاقًا. This is a punishment that is compatible with the things that they were doing. It's not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not overdoing the punishments. Jaza'an wifaqa. It's completely compatible with what they did. And then he says this, why did these guys end up here? إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا لَا يَرْجُونَ حِسَابًا. These guys, they were not looking forward to the day of judgment. These guys, they did not keep their eyesight on where they're going to end up. No, they got themselves busy in this world. And as much as the Prophet and Quran and Hadith came and told them to prepare for the Akhirah, they didn't even look that way. إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا لَا يَرْجُونَ حِسَابًا وَكَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا كِذَّابًا. And they denied our messages. So the one who ends up in hellfire, he ends up there because he has no foresight. He's not thinking about his Akhirah. Then again in Surah As-Sajdah, beautifully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَذُوقُوا بِمَا نَسِيتُمْ لِقَاءَ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا. This difficulty and this punishment that you are experiencing, فَذُوقُوا, feel it, taste it, experience it, بِمَا نَسِيتُمْ, because you forgot the day of judgment. Because you forgot this moment that we were going to meet. إِنَّا نَسِينَاكُمْ. You forgot about us, we're also going to forget about you. Meaning that in this world you forgot about the Akhirah. Now when you come to the Akhirah, there is going to be no mercy there for you. Yes, because you completely forgot about it. And this is not the forgetting where you just forget about something unintentionally. No, this is the type of forgetting where it's intentional. Yes, there's a type of forgetting where it's unintentional. I want to get something done, but I forget about something. I want to pray, but I forget about it. Yes, and then there's the type of forgetting that is intentional, meaning that my prayer is there and I know I'm supposed to pray. But every 5 minutes that something inside me tells me to go and pray, but I'm like, yeah, whatever, let's just leave it. If I miss it, I miss it. It's okay. This is a different type of forgetting. When the Quran says, "Inna nasinakum fadhuqu bima nasitum," taste this pain because you forgot this day. This is not unintentional, involuntarily forgetting about something. No, this is when you were intentional about it. In the sense that it would come up, but you wouldn't pay that. You would actively disregarding the day of judgment. This is the differentiating factor between these two. This is why, brothers and sisters, the concept of contemplation, of thought, of tafakkur is so important in Islam. Because the way you create this foresight for yourself is, as the hadith says, sa'atu tafakkurin. The moments of thought that you have, and it may not necessarily be during a program, it may not necessarily be here or there, it might be while you're driving, for example, it might be when you go to take a walk, it might come at any given point, it might be at night when you lie in bed and you take a look at your life. Those moments of thought and contemplation can make the whole difference in terms of my foresight. Yes, in terms of whether I remember the Akhirah, whether I plan for the Akhirah or not. That's why the hadith says, "Fikratu sa'atin," an hour of thought, "Khayrun min ibadati alf sanatin." It's better than worshiping for 1,000 years. Why? Because sometimes if I really think, and this thought of mine might take a minute, it might take a couple minutes, it might take an hour, for example. Yes, if I can think for a second, and I can remember what my true priority is in life, then sometimes a moment of thought can completely change the direction in which I'm moving. Sometimes a moment of thought can take something that's not a priority for me and turn it into a priority, and take 20 things that were a priority for me before and turn them into things that are not priorities anymore. I can change my life, and this is the power of the human being. This is what makes the human being special. That a moment of thought and contemplation can all of a sudden change him fundamentally. This is why it's better than 1,000 years of worship, because sometimes out of it you can get something more valuable than 1,000 years of worship. This is why multiple ahadith of ours say that a mu'min, a believer, he is a person who is a person of thoughts. He's a person of contemplation. Doesn't mean that he has some, deep philosophical ideas. No. He thinks about the purpose of his life. He thinks about why he's here. He thinks about where he's headed. Hadith of Imam al-Rida, if I'm not mistaken, says, forgive me, this is Imam Ali alayhi salam. It says, "Al-mu'minu maghmurun bifikratihi." A believer, he delves into his thoughts. What does that mean? It means he's not a superficial person. That means when life is going on, he doesn't allow himself to get caught up in the routines of life. Yes? He might be taking care of routines here or there, chores here or there. He runs errands, whatever the case may be. But his thought process is always there. He has moments of thought and contemplation to make sure he is prioritizing the right things in life. Because the reality is, in this life, we may not be able to do everything. We have to see what is our priority. We have to spend time on those things that are our priorities. Yes. Beautifully, this is why Imam as-Sadiq, he was asked, قُلْتُ لَهُ, his companion says, مَا الْعَقْلَ, I asked him, I said, what is intellect? What is this thing that you think of? Can you define it for me? Imam as-Sadiq responded with this. He said, مَا عُبِدَ بِهِ الرَّحْمَنُ وَاكْتُسِبَ بِهِ الْجِنَانِ. He said, intellect is that thing through which the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala worship Him and through which the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enter into heaven. It all comes through thought. It all comes through a moment of contemplation. And like I said, this moment of contemplation, sometimes it can come in the most random of places. Sometimes you might be driving and you think to yourself, if I were to leave the world right now, if I were to be in this car and something were to happen to me, or outside of the car, or maybe this is the last day of my life, what would happen to me? What does my akhirah look like? When Malikul Maut comes, is it going to be the best day of my life? Or is it going to be the worst day of my life? Which one is it going to be? For some people, it's the best day of their life. For some people, when they see Malikul Maut, as hadith says, Ibrahim asked to see what Malikul Maut looks like when he comes to take the souls of those who are believers, who are on the right path. And Ibrahim says, when he saw Malikul Maut, he looked so beautiful that he fainted. Malikul Maut looked so beautiful that he fainted at just looking at the face of Malikul Maut. It's not always scary. For some people, it's scary. For some people, it's the best experience they might have. Yes? But the question I have to ask of myself, these are difficult questions, but questions that we have to ask ourselves. If I'm living my life in the way that I'm living it, is this going to prepare my akhirah? Is this going to prepare me for my life in the hereafter? For those of us who are a little bit older, if I am raising my children in the way that I'm raising them in, yes? Are they going to be the type of children that I can look back on even after I leave this world and be proud? Are they going to be the type of children who in the next world will do good deeds and I will benefit from? Or will they be the type of children who do the wrong things? Yes, and of course a child always has his own free will. But have I done enough to have the right Islamic upbringing for them? So that if I were to leave this world a year from now, 10 years from now, whatever the case may be, have I planted the right seeds? Have I invested enough in their Islamic education, in their Islamic upbringing, in the type of families that we have to spend time with, in the type of friends that we have to spend time with? Have I done this enough? Have I spent time enough with them? This is another issue we have. A lot of parents don't even spend time with their children. Yes? The mother comes or the father comes and they're just busy doing their own thing. And this teenager is busy doing his own thing. And when does the family get together to talk? When does the family get together to do activities together? When does the family get together to even be a unit? Sometimes it never happens. These are questions we have to ask ourselves that will create this foresight for ourselves to think about what is a priority in my life. Yes, life is very busy. Life will always be busy. That's the reality of how things work, yes? Even for myself personally, am I doing the things that I have to do? That if, today was the last day of my life, that I would be able to say, you know what, yes, I can leave this world. I don't have any regrets right now. These are questions that a believer is constantly asking himself. That's why Imam as-Sadiq, he said, Al-mu'minu maghmurun bifikratihi. Yes, he's delving into his thoughts. Meaning that sometimes you'll see he's quiet, and though he's quiet, there's a lot going on in here. Doesn't mean there's a lot going on, he's thinking about this thing and that. No, he's asking himself these difficult questions. Am I prepared or not? This is what creates foresight for the human being. If I have this wealth at my disposal, am I using my wealth properly? Or can I put it at work for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever that might mean for you. Yes? If I have, for example, friends or relatives, can I be of more help to them maybe? My own family, my wife, my husband, my children, my parents, am I being kind to them? Am I being nice to them? Am I doing what I can to make their life easier? Or is it going to be a situation where, God forbid, if I lost one of them, then I'm going to look back and say, oh, I wish I had done things differently. This moment of regret that the human being has, the only way to stop it is foresight. And the only way to have this foresight is tafakkur and thought. And the more a mu'min asks himself these difficult questions, the more he will be prepared for his future, for his akhirah. Right? The hadith says, إِذَا ظَهَرَتِ الْآجَالِ, when the moments of death come, افتضحت الآمال. A lot of the hopes and dreams that people have just goes out the window. Then the things that were actually priorities, they actually start to show up. And the things that this person valued so much and he gave so much time to, then all of a sudden these things, they just go out of the window. Hopes, dreams, they go out of the window. The things that were really important for him, those are the things that all of a sudden show up. Those are the things that will remain with him. Yes? These are difficult questions that we all need to be asking ourselves. This is why a moment of thought, a moment of contemplation can be better than 1,000 years of worship. Because sometimes in one moment, it can change your direction altogether. Inshallah, we'll leave it at that. And inshallah, next week we'll move on to another topic. I want to take the final minutes that we have to discuss the ahkam portion. And of course, this ahkam portion that we're discussing is these are rulings that are always important. But when we get into Ramadan a little bit more in a couple of months, they will be even more crucial. Because, in Ramadan, if you were to travel and all of that stuff, you need to know what the rulings are in terms of when you pray full, when you pray qasr, and by extension, when you are allowed to fast and when you are not allowed to fast. We discussed before that normally the default ruling is that if you're traveling and this travel goes beyond 24 miles, then you are going to pray qasr. But we said there are 4 different situations where even though you are traveling, your salat is still going to be full, even though you're traveling. Number 1 is when you go to stay somewhere for 10 days. Number 2 is when you are a frequent traveler. Sometimes people, they will either, their job is to travel, like a pilot, like a driver, or their job requires them to fly. Maybe they're a consultant, for example. They're flying from one place to another place, a businessman, whatever the case may be. So number 2 is a frequent traveler. Number 3 is a person who has no residence per se. A good example of that is someone who lives in an RV, for example. That's pretty rare, so we won't discuss that too much. And number 4 is the one who travels, but he's making a trip to commit a sin. Maybe he's making this trip, for example, to attend a haram gathering. This person, he has to pray full. He's not going to pray qasr. We were discussing the 10-day stay, and we want to discuss some of the rulings that come up here. So we mentioned that if I go somewhere and I stay there for 10 days, even though I am traveling, that trip of mine, I'm going to be praying full, but I'm going to be praying full when I get to my destination, when I get to that place where I'm going to have a 10-day stay. Not on the way. On the way, I'm going to pray qasr. But when I actually get there, then I'm going to pray full. We mentioned that this 10-day stay, it only applies if you are going to stay in one city. If I, have a trip to Texas or California, for example, and I go from one city to another city, that's not going to apply. It's not going to help me. I have to stay in one city for 10 days. Okay. Now let's move on to some of the different scenarios that come up regarding this 10-day stay. Number 1, what if I go somewhere and I'm not sure? I don't know if I'm going to be staying here for 10 days or not. So maybe I will, maybe I won't. We're not sure yet. As long as you are not sure, you cannot start the intention of this 10-day stay. As long as you are not sure, you are going to continue to pray qasr. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, if I wasn't certain about staying for more than 10 days, but after a couple of days, I realized that, I am. So the first 2 or 3 days, I didn't know, so I prayed qasr. But then after that, you said, now I'm going to stay here. Then what do? Then if the remaining time that you're going to stay there is 10 days, then from that salat onwards, you're going to pray full. But if the remaining time is 7 days, 6 days, then I am not going to pray full. So for example, I go somewhere, yes, and I'm going to be there for 10 days, but the first 2 or 3 days, I'm not sure. After the first 2 or 3 days, you say, you know what, I'm going to stay here for another 7 days. So in total, it's going to be 10. But from the time I made the intention to stay there, it's only going to be 7. Because from the time I made the intention, it's going to be less than 10 days, then I'm going to pray qasr in that situation. I hope that's clear. If it's not, you can just put some questions in the YouTube section and I'll take a look at it. Okay, now moving on to changing your intention. Sometimes you go somewhere and you start praying. For example, you say, I'm going to stay here for 10 days. But then afterwards you realize, no, I'm not going to stay here for 10 days. Then what do? The answer is this, and this is a ruling that's a bit less known. If I go somewhere and I say I'm going to stay here and I'm going to pray full because I'm going to be staying here for 10 days, and then something happens and I realize, well, you know what? No, I'm not going to be staying here for 10 days. If you have prayed the first 4 rakat prayer, then even if you change your mind afterwards, you are going to continue to pray full while you are there in that city. One more time. If I go somewhere and I have the intention I'm going to stay 10 days or more, so because of that, I start praying full. And then I change my mind. So if I change my mind and I've already done 1 4 rakat prayer, whether it's dhuhr, asr, isha, doesn't matter. If I've done 1 4 rakat prayer, then I am going to continue to pray full, even though now I have changed my mind and instead of 13 days, I'm only going to be there for another 3 days. Because I prayed 1 full prayer, I'm going to continue praying full all the way till the end. If I go somewhere and my intention is I am not going to be staying here, and then I make the intention, then from whenever I make the intention, if the remainder, we already covered this, if the remainder is 10 days, then I'm going to pray full in that scenario. And the final question, I won't go through this because I think it's something that we don't deal with too much, but if someone is in the middle of prayer, and in the middle of prayer they decide to stay somewhere for 10 days, they can also just convert their qasr prayer into a full prayer and they will stay there for 10 days. As long as they make that decision, of course, before they have ended the prayer. So even if your intention changes during the prayer, you can also, change plans in the middle of prayer. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you're praying and then there's a breeze that comes and it's good weather and you're like, you know what, I'm going to stay here. Right? And then if you're praying a 2 rakat prayer, then you'll just make it a 4 rakat prayer and you will continue from there. Of course, there are more scenarios and whatnot, but what we try to cover here are the rulings that we think that brothers and sisters would be dealing with more often. I think that's I don't see any questions right now in the comment section. So with that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. Let's take a moment to recite Surah Fatiha for all of our marhumin and marhumat with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Before I forget, we also, inshallah, this Saturday night, we are blessed to have Shaykh Muhammad Saadi, a wonderful speaker who is a native English speaker, inshallah, addressing the community. And I do know that the sponsorships are available for that day. So if anyone would like to sponsor the program for the Wilada of Lady Fatimatul Zahra, you can go ahead and do that on the website as well. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala
Assalamu alaikum everybody. Hey, I hope you guys are all doing great. And I am about to begin reciting Dua Kumal. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa al Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحرق الإثم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بك اسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وأزمع فيما عندك رغبته اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكروك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائحي ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي كبيه بالحسن مبدلا غيرك لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى كديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فاضح من البلاء أقلته وكم من إصار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عزم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وكسرت بي أعمالي وقدأت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي وخدتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفزحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تؤاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شحواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ذري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أحوى وأسأده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مكرا مذعنا مؤترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شد وصاكي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني وركة جلدي ودكة عزمي يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي. أبني الابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولحجابه للصاني من ذكرك واعتقده زميلي من حبك وبعد صدق ترافي ودعائي خاضئا لربوبيتك هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تزيع من ربيتها أو تبعد من أدنيتها أو تشرد من آويتها أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى زمار حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تأبدك طائعة وأشارت باستغفارك مزئنا ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكسور يسير بقاء كثير مدته فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف ذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أزج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلئن سيرتني للعقوبة مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فحبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي أفوق فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأزجن إليك بين أهلها زجيجا آمنين ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولا أبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولا أنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم زجن فيها بمخالفته، وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يزج إليك زجيج مؤمن رحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسلوا إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يهلكه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفا؟ أم كيف يتكلكل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقا؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربا؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إكه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك، وكزيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا، وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالكزية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تحب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته، كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين. الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكونوا مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم، والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت، وبفضلك سترت، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت، أو إحسان فضلت، أو بر نشرت، أو رزق بسطت، أو ذنب تغفر، أو خطأ تستر. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك ركي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا أليما بزري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفكري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك مأمورا، وبخدمتك موصولا، وأعمالي عندك مقبولا، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه مأولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب. قو على خدمتك جوارحي، واجدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في اتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وخافك مخافة المؤمنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده، ومن كادني فكده، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نسيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخسهم زلفة لديك.